qualify first. That's obviously the biggest thing. Hoping you make that, then you can use things like sauna and other things that are more passive recovery to kind of hold some of those heat adaptations without having to train, necessarily in the environment and add a ton of mileage and a ton of stress to your physiology. So you can kind of take some of those things and kind of prolong them for a period of time. But you're correct that if you don't have any exposure to heat at all, like 1 to 2 weeks, you're almost back to baseline again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so all summer long, it just takes 2 cold wintry fall weeks. Yeah. When you train in the heat in the summer, it feels like that's not fair. It feels like you should earn a longer level of heat adaptation. Although if you're going to be training in the cool after that, you probably want to lose it as long as you're not competing in it, because you don't want to be. You probably have a reverse effect there where your tolerance to cold, I would imagine, is lower as your heat adaptation goes up, or is that something that doesn't conflict?
Yeah. So that's something I've been interested in a while, and I tried to find research on it forever because my thought was exactly similar to you, is that if you're thinking along the lines of the SAID principle, like adaptation to cold and heat are probably on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? So my thought was, okay, do they conflict with each other? So if you have someone who, let's say, is getting ready for a huge race in Phoenix, should you not have them do like a lot of cold water stuff because you're getting them to adapt more to a cold stimulus when they're going to compete in a hot environment? I can't find anything that says that's true. The mechanisms overlap a little bit, but not exactly. So what I do with athletes is I call it the barbell method. So just like you would for any other quality you want to develop, just take what you have access to first and just do that. So if you're in Minnesota and you only have a cold water tub, like let's just do some cold adaptation first. Let's not worry about heat. If you're in a hot environment or you have access to a sauna, great. Do the opposite end. Do some heat adaptation first. Once you get pretty good at that, then kind of put that on hold. Maybe not do it at the same thing. Maybe do it once or twice a week. And let's go to the other end of the spectrum. And let's say you're working on hot. Now let's go to the other end of the barbell and work on cold. Once you get pretty good at that, then I would actually have them do contrast therapy back and forth. Because I don't think contrast therapy is bad, but to me it's much more advanced because you have a cold stressor, you have a hot stressor, and you have to switch back and forth extremely fast. Some of the literature shows that there is potentially some benefits to that, but what I've realized with athletes is it's virtually impossible to troubleshoot. Because I've seen multiple athletes now come in where their HRV scores are all just completely screwed. And it's like, man, like, bro, what are you doing? Like, oh, I just got this cold tub the other day. They put the sauna in, and I'm doing this crazy contrast therapy back and forth, And so they went from like nothing to like, balls out, whatever protocol they got off the internet, and their HRV scores are just dropping like a rock. But I don't know at that point was the sauna too hot? Were you dehydrated? Was the cold too cold? Did you switch back and forth too much? Did you do too many rounds? There's so many variables to troubleshoot. You can scale them all down and just kind of go with it. So usually I just have them pick, okay, what do you have access to? What's more specific for your needs? Let's work on that. Cool, we can monitor that, make sure you're not overdoing it, because I have seen CrossFit athletes do a little too much on the Wim Hof and the cold water immersion and just completely tank their HRV. And it took me 3 days to figure out what the hell they were doing because none of their other parameters changed. And I said, you have to be doing something different. This has happened 3 days in a row. And they're like, oh, yeah, I had cold water and like 20 minutes of Wim Hof in the morning. So, so yeah, just pick one, go that, make sure that's good, and then expand the other one. And then you can kind of, go back and forth. And another trick I'll have people do is if you're doing like contrast therapy, do it like usually I'll program it on a Sunday where like Sunday is completely off. Like just walk, do some mobility, like just chill out. And that way I know if Monday is completely screwed and you're not back on track, I know kind of what did it. If you kind of toss it into your other training, unless you're pretty well documented of how you respond to that, it's harder to figure out. And again, the goal is to try to increase your recovery, which to me is just get back to baseline faster. That way on Sunday, you'll be able to look on Monday, and then you'll obviously have your performance data on Monday to see how that's going.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's cool stuff. I wanted to talk to you about ketogenic diets as well, because you're the metabolic.
Oh, and I wanted to say one last thing on the cold.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
People are going to email and go, he said he was going to talk about hypertrophy, and he never did.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So there's about 4 really good studies looking at muscle hypertrophy in cold water immersion. So the studies that did that, it was around 10 to 20 minutes at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The part that you worked on, which mostly was lower body, is completely submerged. And it was done immediately after training. And in those studies, it is correct that they did see not as much hypertrophy compared to the group that didn't do that at all. So if you go anywhere online, people are like, oh my God, don't do cold water. It's destroying all your gains. Like we talked about for strength and power, it's much more of a mixed bag. So for the PhysFlex course, I spent, God, forever. I went through all the studies, went through everything I could find, because in my brain, I'm like, okay, what in plain English does this actually mean, right? Because you well know that you could see an effect size and you could see something that's statistically significant in a study, but it could be so small that it doesn't matter. And again, it depends on the context. If you're an elite level athlete, those small changes could actually be highly significant to you in terms of your performance, even though it was very small in the study, or maybe even non-significant. So I was trying to figure out, I'm like, okay, let's say you're just a crazy hyper responder to hypertrophy, and arbitrarily you can gain 1 pound lean body mass per month, right? Which is way on the high end, but it just makes simple math, right? So 1 year you would gain 12 pounds. Okay, so if I'm a bro and I'm doing all my training and my goal is only hypertrophy and I'm doing cold water immersion after every single session and I'm doing it exactly the way it was in the studies, which most people are not, but let's say they are, what does that cost me? Is that costing me 3/4 of that pound? Is that costing me half a pound? Is it like half an ounce? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer, which annoys the crap out of me because some of the studies used muscle fiber changes. So they could see on muscle fibers there was a difference in hypertrophy. Some of them did use DEXA, but it was probably below the limits of the DEXA.